Good afternoon, guys, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 116, and as I record this video, it is now the first day of spring in 2022, so a little bit of sun coming through the clouds here. I thought with the seasons changing that maybe I would change the vibe that I've been bringing in some of these review videos and maybe go back to Progressive House. I haven't talked about Progressive House for a little while. I've done two other Progressive House Classics videos over the last 2 years. I launched this channel about 2 years ago, and I thought, why not go back and do a third part? So I got some classics over my shoulder just to kind of like set the I'm so cheesy, right? To set the ambiance, and I hope that some of the classics that I bring to the table today, maybe they're classics for me, and maybe they'll surprise you, and maybe they're tracks that you used to have back in the day and you kind of forgot about them. I know for me, for my Progressive House collection, there's a lot of records that I used to have that I had really high regard for, but as I kind of went through the years, I either gave them away or when I go back and listen to them, they kind of lost their charm to me. So there's still some that are left, and the ones that have kind of like survived this repeated culling are the ones that I'm considering classics that probably for most people, and at least for myself personally. So I have 5 records for you today, and I hope you enjoy them. My first one is somebody that I don't think I've ever talked about on this channel, but I used to worship the ground that this guy walked on back in maybe '05 and '06. This is a Matthew Decay record, and it's my favorite Decay record of all time. It is called Behind Secret Borders. It used to be named like Behind Enemy Borders or Behind Enemy Lines. Like it was accidentally mislabeled when it first came out, and I think it featured initially in a mix that Matthew Decay made. And this is 2004, so it was at the tail end of the golden years of Progressive House. For me, Progressive House, I guess you could find early examples as far back as maybe 93 and 94 of tracks that had the semblance of Progressive House, but I think really it didn't kick into gear until about 2001, and I would say maybe 2000, 2001 of what most people consider Progressive House. And I would say maybe Satoshi Tomii's Saw label would be a good representation of what progressive was. Most of it was dark and chuggy and warehousey and industrial. It was like Progressive House was for dudes. It was like something that guys liked. It wasn't very chick friendly for the most part. This one isn't so dark. It has a little bit more of a melodic touch to it, and there's a couple of the elements that stand out. It has kind of like a hard to describe chuggy element that kind of like gives it like a pumping pulse, almost like almost like analog brakes. And there's a metallic ping that hits every, I think, 16 beats. And I remember the first time I heard it, it was almost like the chugging sound and the ping kind of played off of each other, and I remember absolutely being captivated by it. I was riding down Route 76 into a party in Philadelphia, and my friend Dave Stevens was driving, and he was like, dude, you got to check out this Matthew Decay mix. So he put this on, and this was the star track in there, and we kept rewinding the mix back to this track so that we could hear it again. And I remember saying to him, if I was playing this in a DJ set, I might even be tempted to get 2 copies of it because I just love the track that much. So this is Matthew Decay's Behind Secret Borders, and I think the crowning achievement of his catalog. Now, there are other prog heads that like trance probably more than I do, that listen to like Armin van Buuren in the early 2000s. They might actually be more captivated by some of Matthew Decay's other tracks. He had the Trousy album that I remember got a lot of attention, and he had other releases that came out in 2002, 2003 that had more of a trance melodic lead to them. This is more on the darker progressive side, but like I said, with a little bit of just subtle melodic touch in there. Matthew Decay's catalog, there's no albums to listen to. He did a mix comp, like I said, Trousy. he I think the most interesting part of his catalog was from 2001 to 2006. After that, he took some time off. I don't know, now that I'm saying this kind of on the fly, I feel like something happened in his life personally where I don't know what happened, but I think he took time off because of some kind of personal struggle. I think some external influence caused him like grief or a problem of some sort. And either way, he was out of the scene for a while, but then he reappeared in 2011 on All Day I Dream, and All Day I Dream was just getting started then. That was the almost the origination of the second round of what we now call fluff prog, and some of those Matthew Decay records are very sought after. I have them in my want list. I think they're like $100. I don't like them that much to pay $100 for them, but if they repress them, I would probably get them. But for me, the real Matthew Decay that has my heart is that original golden era. When I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking about the Involver mix, and the original Involver that Sasha made was really possibly the crowning achievement of commercially released progressive house. I remember when that mix came out, it was like the perfect mix to put on when you were driving home from an event, because it really pushed boundaries, and it kind of set the bar like pretty much at the highest level that you could reach, that you could attain with progressive music. I thought it was really interesting because I heard all of my friends talking about it for weeks and months, and I just never got around to listening to it. And then when I finally did listen to it, I was expecting it to be this like energy overload, really hard banging, crazy kind of peak hour mix, and it's not that. I was taken back by the softness of it. It opens up with that Grand National Talk Amongst Yourselves track, which I love, but the first thing you notice when you're listening to it is how slow it is, and it's like, wow, this is some really like breezy, groovy stuff. And I think Sasha was also the first one to make an entire mix compilation out of his own remixes. So Involver was just like Involver, the first one that came out in 2004, was just the absolute pinnacle, I think, of Sasha's career. At that point, he was basically levitating and walking on water, and every producer, every DJ just loved him, aspired to be him, and it was really, I think, the crowning achievement. The subsequent Involvers that came out still have the same theme of Sasha putting his own remix touch, maybe with Charlie May's assistance as well. But the second and third, it's just kind of like when you make a perfect movie and then you try to add a sequel to it. It's not that the sequels are necessarily bad, but it just doesn't. I mean, think of like Back to the Future. A lot of people would say that the first one is the one that has all the magic, even though I kind of like Back to the Future 3 too. But I think that's a pretty good analogy for it, of how it's like very hard to top perfection when it first happens. So one of the tracks that I want to talk to you specifically, I mentioned the Grand National. I might talk about that in a different episode, but I think one of the other tracks that was kind of the star of that show was the Lostep Burma remix that Sasha did. Now, Lostep is an alias of Phil Chabel, who was a progressive god. I mean, people loved him back in the day. I don't think he could DJ, or if he did DJ, I don't think people liked it. I think he was considered to be a producer that should not be DJing. I remember people saying that. But either way, Low Step is Phil Chabel and Phil K. Now, Phil K was, I think, most known for that track called Cloud Break, where Lexicon Avenue remixed it. That was a monster. That was on Dave Seaman's Audio Therapy. That could actually be considered a classic, but I'm not prepared to talk about that today. So anyways, you got Luke Chabel and Phil K pairing up as Low Step, and the original mix of Burma is a little bit, I think it's a little bit too wonky for me. It's definitely something that I would like to add to my collection, but I think Sasha's touch made it a little bit more smooth and palatable, and it definitely makes it fit better into the Involver vibe. Low Step, like I said, the Burma had a slight wonk factor, and I think the wonkiness that Low Step wanted to convey actually was more clearly represented in their next single that came out, Because We Can. And with a title like Because We Can, it's like, well, why would you make a track like that? And they were just pushing boundaries and just getting weird, because that's kind of what they wanted to make. And I don't fault that record, Because We Can. I think it actually was good, and I remember enjoying it at the time. But Sasha sort of reined it in and gave it that timelessness. One of the things that I noticed is that progressive house and breaks started to fuse maybe around 2003, and it seemed like the progressive house breaks were more for like the nerds. I don't know why, but it seems like nerdy people like the break beats the most. And progressive house breakbeat fusion, I don't know. I would say that this Sasha remix is probably in the top 5 all time of progressive breakbeat tracks. It's just really good. It's really timeless, like I said. And thank you, Sasha, for just kind of swooping in and putting the nice polished touch on an already pretty interesting track. Can't talk about progressive house classics without mentioning Digweed's Heaven Sent. As I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking about what I wanted to say about Digweed. Digweed is a producer that is absolutely adored by a lot of people. My good friend Doombot absolutely loves Digweed. He has him in the hero category. It's like everything that Digweed plays and every track that he plays is a bomb. Every mix is good. And actually, Digweed he's an astonishingly good mixer. If you go see him and just kind of hang out near the booth and watch him, he manages to just mix track after track, and you just don't hear any mistakes. I mean, it's not that he never makes mistakes, but his mistake ratio is probably one of the lowest out of any professional DJ that's not using any type of syncing. He's just got it down. I mean, he's got it down, and I think to some extent your ability to mix as a DJ also depends on maybe your God-given ability to sort out different sounds in an extremely loud environment. That's where I think if I was ever going to be a professional DJ, I might actually falter, because I have this hearing condition. It's called hyperacusis, where it's like I'm actually very sensitive to sounds. So if you put me like in a monitor situation where I can't turn the monitor down to the right level, my ears get drowned out. It's almost like a wall of sound coming at me, and I need it to be toned back so that I can hear both sounds clearly. There's been a lot of times where I was doing a B2B set with a DJ that liked the headphones louder and the monitor louder, and if we went back and forth every 2 records, we would just keep having to switch the levels back and forth, because the level that I can mix at and like discern all the sounds and feel like I'm really putting out a quality blend is completely different for me than it is for other people, and it's lower for me. But anyways, I always wondered if Digweed had, like, literally, if he had good DJing ears that gave him that advantage. I don't have a lot of Digweed records in my collection. I just realized that this is it. This is the only Digweed record that I have. He aliased as Bedrock in the early. This is an early Bedrock logo here, and he did a lot of Bedrock productions in that era. I don't have a lot of Bedrock records left in my collection. I've had a few over the years and just sort of either gave them away or you know, sold them off, or, you know, lost them. I don't know, but Heaven Sent has like hung in there. And who could get rid of Heaven Sent, right? I first heard about Heaven Sent back when I was in college, and there was a girl that I was friends with, and she was into electronic music. And back in like 2000, there wasn't you had to get your electronic music by any means you could. You could just type in random search strings like house or techno or club music into Napster and just download music and just sift through it and try to find things. But Heaven Sent escaped me. I didn't know about it, and this girl was like, "Oh man, you got to check out Heaven Sent. This is like my favorite track of all time." And she sent me the MP3, and I fired it up on my Winamp. And I mean, obviously, you can't argue with the melodics in this. This is probably Digweed's best moment of production, and this was also featured as the star track in the movie Groove, where it centers around kind of a night out at a warehouse party, and you're introduced to all the characters. And one of the culminating moments of the party is where the one guy, David, he takes something, and as it's like kicking in at the party, oh no, actually no, Heaven Sent wasn't played when it was when David's substance was kicking in. It was that other tech house track. But either way, Heaven Sent was the moment where David and Layla reconnect on the dance floor after the party got broken up by the police. So they come together. That's right, they come together, and they have this kiss right as the melody drops. And it was like, basically the whole movie was almost like a commercial for John Digweed's single, and John Digweed got to make a little cameo where he had a few lines in the movie. But definitely an undisputed classic, and if you guys miss this, you know, you never know, definitely enjoy it. And do you guys remember the producer named Habersham? I used to have a ton of Habersham records, and they haven't stuck around in my collection except for this one. This is Habersham's remix of kind of a lesser known progressive house record called Beaumont Tiburon Court. And to me, I just always got hooked on the melody in this. I had a friend that I used to talk to over AOL Instant Messenger, and we would send each other files through there. And he put me on to this, and he was a big progressive house head. I can't even remember his name. You know, when I think back of like some of the people I used to talk to on Instant Messenger, I can't even remember like half of them. But it's like at that time they were such a big part of my life. But anyways, he was a big prog head into lots of vapor recordings and Luke Chabal type projects. So anything that had like a bloopy, hooky, soft, kind of spaced out melody got this guy's attention, and this track definitely meets the requirements for that. This probably has less than 150 owners on Discogs, maybe even less than 100. It's cheap, but if you listen to how the melody sits in the background, this track carries on for about 8, 9, 10 minutes. There's just something magic about it, and it might be, if I think about it, it might be a 3 or 4 note melody loop, and it just sits in bleeps and bloops in the background, and there's just something absolutely perfect about it that I just love. And my final pick for you today is by an artist named Luke Fair. Luke Fair, whenever I saw his name in print, I used to confuse him with Luke Chabal because they would often appear on the same record labels and the same types of projects, but two different people. Luke Fair did what I would consider to be one of the last prominent releases on Bedrock in its original, like, kind of golden era. I would say after 2000, this is a 2005 release, by the way. I would say by the time 2006 had come, that's when prog started to lose its way, and it got a little bit more into what I would consider to be the first iteration of fluff prog. Like, progressive house just started to get weird. Electro was influencing it, probably not for the better. And in 2007, that's when Deadmau5 dropped Faxing Berlin, which is probably, you know, one of the fluffiest early fluff prog tracks to ever come out. This isn't fluff. This is nasty and hard and energetic. It's like it's got almost like more drums than it needs. It's so busy with its drums, but you can't argue with the momentum that this creates. One of the things that I thought of when I was listening to it is that it really did remind me of Satoshi Tomii's early Saw releases. If you think of Paranoise or Virus or Bypass Penetration, you'll hear the same sort of like warped metal, kind of like if you took a piece of sheet metal, and like if you've ever like had a piece of sheet metal and you just like kind of like wave it back and forth, it'll kind of like flip and floop, and it kind of that sound that metal makes when it does that flip flop sound is what you'll hear in the background of this track. It's almost like straight up traditional dark progressive sound, like one of the early sounds. Now this came out in 2005, and I was almost surprised when I saw the date on the label, because I was like, man, that really could have been an '01 record. But I think it was really, like I said, the last gasp of the early Bedrock era that people like really obsess over and try to collect all of them. This is it. So really nasty record. And one other thing that I want to say, if you guys haven't heard this, there was a 2005 mix that was originally mislabeled as a John Digweed mix. Now, it turned out that it was made by a couple of guys that were just DJs, and they strung together this 3 hour and 20 minute mix that for years people thought was a Digweed mix, and because they thought it was a Digweed mix, they obsessed over like trying to compile all the track list and all this stuff. I'll give you a link to right in the description to go and check this out. You can see some of the comments, and you can see people still, even to this day, trying to fill in some of the blanks in this track list. That mix is the craziest, I think undisputably the craziest dark prog mix that you'll ever hear that has this sound. And the reason that I'm talking about it now is because that mix ends with this. And the reason that it ends with this is because of the high energy of this. Like, you can't really play block rock and then go into something that's a little bit more low key without just taking the energy right out of the room. So it makes sense. The mix that I'm going to give you the link to, it was very well calculated. It was very well arranged. It was premeditated, very obviously, and that's what gives it that like crazy lasting power, because it just doesn't have any mess ups. So you just get this like this really nice like representation of like the ultimate peak hour progressive house mix, and it culminates with block rock. That is all for my Progressive House Classics Episode 3 mix. I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to comment down below if you feel inspired by anything I talked about today. That's all for today, and take care.